He could not move. Kim Jae-won stood at that food stand like a man who had just watched the ground open beneath his feet, because the last time he had seen her, she was sitting at their breakfast table with divorce papers in front of her and tears she was too proud to shed. She had given him everything, 5 years, her savings, her scholarship, her belief, her body, her prayers. And he had slid those papers across the marble, watched her sign them, and walked out without looking back. He had not expected this. He had not expected her to walk into a park group event in that burgundy gown. He had not expected the way she carried herself, unhurried, complete. And he had absolutely not expected the man standing beside her. Park Jin-woo, chairman of the most formidable empire in South Korea. A man whose name made boardrooms go silent and whose presence made entire crowds rearrange themselves without being asked. Standing beside Adeola, his hand resting at the small of her back. Jae-won's mouth went dry. He watched her face remain completely unmoved. And then he felt it, the shift in the air. Park Jin-woo piercing gaze. I don't believe we've been introduced, though I understand you knew my wife. The words landed like a sentence being read in court. My wife. Kim Jae-won, the man who had decided Adeola was finished, stood completely still as the full weight of what he was looking at collapsed onto him all at once. The woman he had left broken at a breakfast table in a borrowed life was standing in front of him as Mrs. Park Jin-woo. And there was not a single thing left to say. Welcome to Afro-Korean Love Stories. In today's episode, we bring you betrayals, new beginnings, broken trust, fated encounters, worlds colliding, and dark romance. If you're just joining us for the first time, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on your notification bell so you don't miss out on new story drops. Let me know in the comments which city you're watching from. I want to see how far these amazing stories have traveled. Now hold on to your seats as we take a deep dive into this amazing story. Her name was Adeola Adeyemi, and she arrived in Seoul at 24, wide-eyed, certain, and completely unprepared for what the journey actually costs. She was stunning in a way that made people look twice and then look away quickly, embarrassed by their own staring. Deep brown skin that caught light the way velvet does. Eyes that were always slightly amused. She carried herself with the kind of quiet confidence that takes years to build. Except back then, she didn't know she had it. Back then, she still believed it could be taken from her. And it was. His name was Kim Jae-won, and he was everything a young woman far from home could mistake for destiny. Tall, soft-spoken, with a smile that arrived slowly, the kind of smile that felt earned. He pursued her the way men pursue women they have already decided they will have. Intentionally, patiently, completely. She was 3 months into her scholarship program when he told her she was the most extraordinary woman he had ever seen. 6 months in, she believed him. By the end of the first year, she had chosen him over everything else, including the future she had crossed an ocean to build. She dropped the scholarship. She told herself it wasn't the right time, that she could always go back, that love was also a kind of education. She got 2 of those 3 things wrong. She worked. God, how she worked. 3 jobs at the peak of it. A cafe in the mornings, a translation agency in the afternoons, a remote data entry role through the nights. Everyone she didn't spend on rent went into Jae-won's business. He had a vision, he said. A logistics company that would grow into something significant, he said. He just needed time and capital and someone who believed in him. She believed in him with everything she had. And here is the thing nobody tells you about pouring yourself into someone else's dream. You don't notice you're disappearing until there's almost nothing left of you to find. 5 years. 5 years of early mornings and late nights and transferred bank balances and swallowed complaints. 5 years of telling herself that partnership meant sacrifice, that real love showed up in what you gave, not what you kept. Jae-won's business began to grow. Slowly at first, then faster. New clients. New contracts. His name began circulating in rooms she wasn't invited into. He started coming home later. He started taking calls in the other room. He started looking at her differently, not with the hunger of a man in love, but with the mild discomfort of a man who has outgrown his space and doesn't know how to say it. She noticed. She asked. He reassured her. She believed him because she had invested too much not to. Then one Tuesday morning, he placed a manila envelope on the breakfast table, pushed it toward her without meeting her eyes, and said the 7 words that would rearrange the entire architecture of her life. "I think we should end this, Adeola." She stared at the envelope. Divorce papers. Already signed on his side. Already dated. Which meant he had already decided. Which meant the conversation she thought they were about to have had already happened, just without her. She didn't cry. Not in front of him. She asked one question. Was there someone else? He was quiet for exactly 2 seconds too long. Her answer was in those 2 seconds. Her name, she would later find out, was Han Soyeon. Wealthy. Connected. Korean. Everything Jaewon had apparently decided he now deserved. She signed the papers that same evening. Not because she had stopped loving him. She wasn't even sure yet what she felt. But because something older and fiercer than heartbreak rose up inside her the moment she picked up that pen. Something that sounded less like grief and more like enough. She gave herself 3 days. 3 days to sit on the floor of the apartment she had helped furnish, in a city that was not her own, in a life that had been quietly stolen from her piece by piece. She ate very little. She slept in fragments. She let herself feel the full, ugly weight of what had happened, because she had learned somewhere, in some quiet part of herself, that the only way through a wound is through it. On the 4th day, she got up, washed her face, made tea, opened her laptop, and started over. She had almost nothing. A small savings account Jaewon hadn't known about. Money she had tucked away in the early years out of a habit she couldn't explain, some instinct for self-preservation that had quietly saved her. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Completely, entirely hers. She enrolled in her first tech course that same week. It was harder than she expected and lonelier than she could have prepared for. There were nights she questioned everything, her choices, her intelligence, her right to even attempt rebuilding at 29 in a language and industry that hadn't been designed with her in mind. There were forums where she felt invisible and classrooms where she had to work twice as hard just to be taken half as seriously. But Adeola Adeyemi had spent 5 years building someone else's dream. She knew how to work in the dark. She knew how to push past exhaustion. She knew how to believe in something that hadn't proven itself yet. This time, she was just doing it for herself. Within 18 months, she had completed 3 certifications. Within 2 years, she had built her first app, a seamless, beautifully designed platform that solved a specific problem in the Seoul expat market. Apartment listings, community connections, and local service translations all in one place. Simple, elegant, necessary. It grew faster than she had planned for. By the end of year 3, she had a small team, a modest but healthy revenue stream, and a reputation in Seoul's tech circles as someone who understood both the human problem and the technical solution. She wasn't famous. She wasn't wealthy. But she was standing, firmly, fully, on ground she had built with her own hands. And she was just getting started. The call came on an ordinary Wednesday. Her assistant forwarded it with a note that simply read, "Park Group. They want a meeting." Adeola stared at those 4 words for a long moment. Park Group. There was not a single person in Seoul's business world who did not know that name. A conglomerate so vast and so deeply embedded in the city's economy that trying to trace its edges was like trying to find where the sky ends. Hotels, finance, construction, technology. And underneath all of it, in the spaces where business and power blur into something older and darker, a reputation that made people speak carefully when the name Park Jin-woo came up. She had heard the stories. Everyone had. She went to the meeting anyway. The Park Group headquarters occupied the top 6 floors of a building that looked like it had been designed to make everyone who entered it feel slightly smaller than they were. She rode the elevator to the 43rd floor, smoothed her blazer, and told herself she was simply meeting a potential client. The doors opened into a boardroom that was already full. Senior executives, legal counsel, a technical team with expensive equipment and careful expressions. They all looked up when she walked in. And then he walked in. Park Jin-woo. He was taller than she had imagined, broad-shouldered, unhurried, dressed in a charcoal suit that had clearly been made specifically for his body. His face was the kind of handsome that feels almost architectural, precise, symmetrical, striking in a way that had nothing soft about it. He moved through the room the way powerful men move, without acknowledging the space they take up, because the space simply rearranges itself around them. He sat at the head of the table, looked at the room briefly, and then his eyes landed on her. They stayed there for exactly 1 beat longer than necessary. She held his gaze. She had learned, in the years since Jaewon, not to be the first one to look away. Something shifted almost imperceptibly in his expression. Not a smile. Not quite. But something. "Miss Adeyemi," he said. His voice was low, measured, with the particular cadence of a man who has never had to raise it to be heard. "I've reviewed your work. Your platform's architecture is unlike anything currently in our internal pipeline. We have a problem. Our people tell me you might be the solution." She opened her folder. "Tell me about the problem." And just like that, they began. The project was a complete digital overhaul of Park Group's operational infrastructure, a transition from legacy systems to a fully integrated tech ecosystem. The kind of work that could take a large firm 18 months. She proposed doing it in 11 with a leaner, smarter architecture. Jinwoo approved it without blinking. They met weekly, then twice weekly. Always professionally. Always in boardrooms with other people present. But there was a current underneath every meeting, quiet, undeniable, the kind of thing that neither of them named because naming it would require acknowledging it, and acknowledging it would change everything. He noticed things. Small things. The way she paused before answering a question she considered beneath her intelligence, not rudely, but with a patience that was somehow louder than impatience. The way she defended her technical decisions without apology but with evidence, never raising her voice, never needing to. The way she laughed. Only when something was actually funny, which made every laugh feel like something he had earned. She noticed things too. The way he listened, completely, without the performance of listening that most powerful men substituted for actual attention. The way he treated the people around him, demanding, yes, but never cruel. The way he looked at her sometimes, when he thought she was focused on her screen, with an expression she couldn't quite name. Like she was a problem he hadn't expected to find interesting. 6 months into the project, he asked her to dinner. Not as a business meeting. He was very clear about that. "Dinner," he said, standing at the floor-to-ceiling window of his office, Seoul glittering 43 floors below them. Not a briefing. Not a debrief. Dinner. She was quiet for a moment. "Chairman Park." "Jinwoo," he said, still not looking at her. "When it's just us, it's Jinwoo." She looked at his profile against the city lights. At the careful stillness of a man who was not used to asking for things, because he had never needed to. "Dinner," she said finally. "All right." He turned then. And that thing that wasn't quite a smile, it was closer this time. The restaurant he chose had no menu. That was the first thing she noticed. No menu, no other visible guests, no music except something low and instrumental that seemed to exist specifically for the room they were sitting in. Just 2 place settings on a table by a window that framed Seoul like a painting someone had spent a lifetime perfecting. She raised an eyebrow when she sat down. "No menu." "I called ahead," he said simply. "And if I had allergies?" "You don't," he replied without arrogance. "Just fact. Sesame allergy ruled out in your onboarding medical. Shellfish, you ordered prawns at the Gangnam briefing in March. Dairy. You memorized my eating habits." She cut him off. "So now you're stalking me." He looked at her steadily. "I pay attention to things that matter to me." The silence that followed was deafening. She looked down at her glass. Something warm was moving through her chest, something she hadn't felt in a long time and wasn't entirely sure she trusted yet. She had been here before, hadn't she? Sitting across from a man who made her feel seen. She knew how that story ended. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said. "You can ask," he replied. "I'll decide whether to answer." She almost smiled. "Fair enough. Do you do this often? The dinner, the attention, the..." She gestured vaguely at the impossible restaurant around them. He was quiet for a moment. Not evasive. Genuinely considering. "No. I don't." "Why me then?" He looked at her briefly, like she was the only thing in the room worth the energy of a full gaze. "Because you're the first person I have met in a very long time who treats my status like furniture. Useful. Noted. Completely unremarkable." She blinked. Then she laughed, real unguarded, the kind of laugh that escapes before you can decide whether to release it. He watched her laugh like he was memorizing it. That might be the strangest compliment I've ever received, she said out loud. It is the most honest one I know how to give. They took it slowly, deliberately, as though they both understood that what was building between them was the kind of thing that collapses if you rush it. He learned her in pieces. That she made her best decisions at midnight. That she kept a journal not to process her feelings, but to argue with herself on paper. That she had a particular intolerance for dishonesty that went bone deep, the kind that comes not from being a principled person in theory, but from being a destroyed one in practice. She never told him about Jae-won directly. But Jinwoo was a man who had built an empire on reading what people didn't say. He saw it, in the way she sometimes flinched at softness, like kindness was a thing she had learned not to trust. In the way she would occasionally grow very still in the middle of a warm moment, as though checking whether it was real. One evening, sitting on the rooftop of his private residence, the city below them and the sky above them doing something spectacular with clouds and fading light, he said quietly, "Someone hurt you badly." It wasn't a question. She kept her eyes on the horizon. Someone let me fund his entire life and then decided I wasn't Korean enough to stay married to. The air changed. She felt him go still beside her. "He's in Seoul?" Jinwoo asked. His voice had dropped half a register. "Somewhere," she replied. "I don't track him." That single sound carried more weight than most sentences. She finally looked at him. His jaw was set. His eyes were on the horizon, but they weren't seeing it. She recognized that expression now. It was the one he wore when he had already made a decision and was simply waiting for the appropriate moment to execute it. "Jinwoo." "Yes." "Leave it. Let it go. It's all in the past." A long pause. Then slowly, the tension in his jaw released just slightly. He looked at her. "As you wish." But she noticed he didn't say yes. 3 months later, he asked her to marry him. Not with fanfare. Not in public. In his kitchen at 7 in the morning, while she was stealing coffee she hadn't been offered yet, wearing his oversized cardigan over her clothes because Seoul in November had opinions. He was leaning against the counter watching her with that expression she had come to understand was his version of completely undone. "Marry me," he said, like it was the most logical thing he had ever said. She turned around slowly, coffee cup halfway to her lips. "I'm sorry. You heard me." "Jinwoo, it's 7 in the morning." "I'm aware. Marry me." She stared at him. At this man, this terrifying, careful, surprisingly tender man who had dismantled every wall she had rebuilt brick by patient brick, who had never once made her feel like a guest in her own life, who had looked at her, really looked, and stayed. "I've been married before," she said quietly. "It didn't." "I know." He cut her off and crossed the kitchen in 3 steps, took the coffee cup gently from her hands, set it on the counter, and held her face in both of his. "I am not him. And you are not who you were then. Marry me, Adeola." Her eyes were burning. She hated that her eyes were burning. "You're very inconvenient," she whispered. "I've been told. More times than one. Is that a yes?" She looked at him for a long moment. At the steadiness in his eyes. At the man who had memorized her eating habits and called it paying attention. At the man who had gone still with fury on a rooftop when he heard what had been done to her and controlled it, for her. She blurted out with tears. He exhaled, slowly, quietly, like a man releasing something he had been holding for a very long time. Then he kissed her. Not urgently, not hungrily, with the particular deliberateness of a man who has finally arrived somewhere he intends to stay. Now, before we get to what happens next, I need you to pause for a second. Have you ever poured everything you had, your money, your dreams, your most precious years, into someone who looked you in the eyes, let you sacrifice it all, and then walked away the moment they no longer needed you? Some people will drain you completely and still sleep peacefully at night. If you were in her shoes, would have noticed this outcome way sooner, or truly, truly love, they say, is blind. Drop your replies in the comments. I read every single one. And isn't it something that the same woman who was left broken and alone in a foreign country, with nothing but a small savings account and a shattered heart, is accepting the proposal of one of the most powerful and dangerous men in Seoul? Would you have opened yourself up to another man so soon, or would you have focused more on your currently career? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. Hit the like button if you've enjoyed the story so far, and share to your friends and family who you think would love to watch the story. Let's get back into it. Few weeks had passed. The launch event was Jinwoo's idea. A celebration of the completed digital transformation of Park Group. 18 months of work compressed into 11, just as she had promised. The venue was a sprawling rooftop space in Gangnam, dressed in black and gold, with souls spread out beneath it like something that had been arranged specifically for the occasion. 400 guests. Every significant name in Korean business, technology, and finance. Cameras from 3 major publications. And Adeola, in a deep burgundy gown that moved like water when she walked, her hair pinned up with 2 loose pieces framing her face, arrived on the arm of Park Jinwoo. The room noticed. But tonight there was something additional in the air. A curiosity, a murmur that passed between guests like electricity through a wire. Because the woman beside him was not the kind of woman Seoul's elite circles had seen on his arm before. She was warm where this world was cold, radiant, and real in a way that made everything around her look slightly performative. She felt the stares. She had learned to wear them like weather, something that exists, something you acknowledge, something that does not stop you from moving. Jinwoo leaned down slightly as they moved through the crowd. "You're doing the thing," he murmured. "What thing?" "The thing where you pretend the entire room isn't staring at you." "I'm not pretending," she said quietly. "I genuinely don't care." He looked at her sideways. That almost smile. "I know. It's extraordinarily attractive." She kept her expression composed, but her hand tightened slightly on his arm. The evening moved beautifully. Speeches. Applause. Jinwoo was in his element, present, commanding, saying precisely what needed to be said and nothing more. Adeola was mid-conversation with Park Group's head of international partnerships when she excused herself quietly and made her way toward the refreshment area. The food stand was tucked at the edge of the rooftop, beautifully arranged, slightly quieter than the main floor. She was reaching for a glass when she heard a voice behind her, a voice she had not heard in 3 years. "Adeola." She stilled, just for a fraction of a second, the involuntary response of a body that remembers pain before the mind has time to process it. Then she composed herself completely and turned around. Kim Jae-won. He looked good. That was the first thing she registered, and she registered it without feeling. He was dressed well, his business clearly still thriving, his confidence sitting on him like a well-fitted jacket. Beside him, slightly behind him, stood a woman in a silver dress, Han So-yeon, the woman he had left her for, pretty in a careful, constructed way. Her eyes moved over Adeola. Jae-won's eyes moved over her differently. "I thought that was you," he said. His voice carried that familiar cadence, warm on the surface. "What are you doing here?" "This is a Park Group event." "Yes, it is," she replied. "I mean," he smiled in the way people smile when they're trying to diminish something. "These events are quite exclusive. How did you?" Jae-won. Her voice was even, unbothered, almost gentle. "It's been 3 years. Is this really how you want to spend the first 30 seconds? He blinked. He had expected something else, nerves, perhaps. Shrinking. The Adeola he had left would have shrunk. "You look," he started. "I know," she cut him off. His jaw tightened slightly, still as sharp as ever. There it was, the edge underneath the pleasantry. "I heard you started some small app. Good for you. These things take time to really." Kim Jae-won. The voice came from behind Adeola. Low. Quiet. Jae-won looked up, and the color left his face so completely and so quickly that it was almost interesting to watch. Park Jinwoo stood behind his wife, not touching her, not crowding her, but present. His eyes were on Jae-won with an expression that had no anger in it whatsoever, which somehow made it significantly more terrifying. "I don't believe we've been introduced," Jinwoo said. "Though I understand you know my wife." The words landed like stones dropped into still water. "My wife." Jae-won's mouth opened. Closed. I'm sorry, your wife," Jinwoo repeated, pleasantly. "You were speaking to her just now. I watched from across the room. I noticed your tone." Beside Jae-won, Han So-yeon had gone the color of her silver dress. Because she knew she worked under Park Group. She knew exactly who was standing in front of her husband. She knew exactly what that tone of voice meant from this particular man. She knew the stories. She had sat in boardrooms where his displeasure had ended careers without him raising his voice once. "Chairman Park," she said quickly, stepping forward slightly, her voice tight with the effort of staying controlled. "I am so sorry. My husband meant no disrespect. He didn't realize that she was my wife." Jinwoo cut her off. His eyes moved to Soyeon briefly, or that she deserved basic respect regardless. Soyeon's mouth closed. The silence around the food stand had expanded. Nearby guests had gone very still. Jae-won found his voice. "Chairman Park, I assure you, Adeola and I are old acquaintances. I was simply... You are speaking to my wife with a familiarity and a condescension that I found inappropriate." Yes. Yes, sir. I apologize." The words came out stripped of everything, the confidence, the casual cruelty, the smile that had once slid divorce papers across a breakfast table. "Sincerely. I meant no disrespect to you, or to Mrs. Park." Adeola kept her face completely composed, but something settled in her chest, quiet and warm and final. Jinwoo looked at him for one long moment. Then he looked at Soyeon. "My team will escort you to the exit. Thank you, and have a good evening." Soyeon's eyes filled. She nodded once, tightly, and reached for Jae-won's arm. He let himself be led, diminished, silent. The architecture of his confidence completely dismantled in under 4 minutes. Adeola watched them go. She felt nothing sharp, nothing vengeful, just a quiet, settled sense of completion, like the last piece of something clicking into place. Jinwoo moved to stand beside her. He didn't say anything immediately, just looked out at the city below them, giving her whatever she needed the moment to be. Then quietly, "Are you all right?" She considered the question honestly. "Yes," she said. "Actually, yes." He nodded. Then he offered her his arm. "Come back inside. They're about to make the toast." She slipped her hand through his arm, and they walked back into the light together. Later that night, when the guests had gone and the city had settled into its quiet hum, they sat together on the rooftop of their residence, the same rooftop where he had first heard about Jae-won, where he had gone still with a fury he had controlled entirely for her. Seoul glittered below them, indifferent and beautiful. She had her legs tucked, a glass of wine held loosely in her fingers, her heels long abandoned somewhere inside. The burgundy gown pooled around her like something ceremonial. Jinwoo was beside her, jacket off, the top button of his shirt undone, the closest she had ever seen him come to completely unwound. They hadn't spoken about it since leaving the event. They didn't need to. That was one of the things she had learned about him. He understood that some moments need silence before they need words. It was she who finally spoke. "I used to rehearse it," she said quietly. "What I would say if I ever saw him again. I had whole conversations planned. Things I should have said at that breakfast table. Arguments I never got to finish." Jinwoo listened. Just listened. And then, tonight, there he was. And I had nothing to say. She paused. Not because I was afraid, but because there was genuinely nothing left. No anger. No grief. Nothing. "That is what healing looks like," Jinwoo said quietly. "Not when it stops hurting. When it stops mattering." She looked at him. At this man who had walked into her professional life and dismantled every careful wall she had constructed, not through force, but through patience, through consistency, through showing up the same way every single time until she had no logical reason left not to believe him. "Can I tell you something?" she said. "Always. When I dropped that scholarship, when I chose him over everything I had worked for, I told myself it was love. That love meant sacrifice. That the measure of how much you felt something was how much you were willing to give up for it." She shook her head slowly. "I had it completely wrong." "How do you see it now?" he asked. She was quiet for a moment. "Real love doesn't ask you to disappear. It asks you to stay, fully, completely yourself. It expands you. It doesn't hollow you out." Jinwoo reached over and took her hand. Not dramatically. Just took it. Held it. "For what it's worth, I am grateful every day that you rebuilt yourself before I found you. Because the woman I found, the one who walked into my boardroom and looked at my status like furniture, she is the only version of you I could have fallen in love with. the one who had already chosen herself. Her eyes burned again. She had really hoped to get through an entire evening without that happening. "You are so inconvenient," she whispered. "You keep saying that." He lifted her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles, slowly, deliberately, the way he did everything. She felt it move through her like warmth through a cold room. She looked at him, this terrifying, careful, extraordinary man. This city that had broken her, and then handed her everything. This life that looked nothing like the one she had planned, and everything like the one she had deserved all along. "I know," she said. And she meant it. "I finally know." He pulled her into his side, and she let herself rest there, completely, without the old instinct to hold something back. Below them, soul kept moving, indifferent and brilliant, full of people building and losing and rebuilding, full of stories that hadn't found their endings yet. Hers had. Or rather, hers was just beginning. Some people will take everything you have, your money, your time, your most irreplaceable years, and leave without looking back. And for a while, it will feel like proof that you were never enough. But Adila's story is a reminder that being left by the wrong person is sometimes the most violent, most necessary redirection of your life. She didn't just survive what J1 did to her. She became someone he could never have handled. Someone that the most powerful man in Seoul couldn't stay composed around. Not because she chased greatness, but because she chose herself, quietly and completely, when every reason to give up was sitting right in front of her. And the universe, in its own particular, unhurried way, took very careful note of that. If this story moved you, if you felt every single turn of it, please hit that like button and share this with someone who needs to be reminded that starting over is not the end of the story. Subscribe and turn on your notification bell so you never miss a new episode. We drop new stories every week, and trust me, they only get better from here. This has been Afro-Korean Love Stories. I will see you in the next one.